Using Unreal makes this accessible to a small team like us. Like when I'm doing Redshift comparisons for render times, it legitimately was 100 times faster.
All right, boys. So first thing I wanted to ask you about was being 3D artists, motion designers in Detroit. So I've only been to Detroit once. I thought it was an amazing city. It wasn't what I expected because I kind of grew up, like when the Eminem movie came out, and I thought, oh, it's this town that's just been kind of decimated by all the auto manufacturers leaving and all that kind of stuff. But there's actually like a pretty sweet motion design community there. So Dan, why don't we start with you? And Kris, I'll go to you next. I want to know, like, what is the scene like in Detroit these days?
Well, you kind of came when it was building. I don't know what that was, 8 years ago or something like that. It started small because I was initially in Los Angeles and moved back to Michigan, and it was 2 to 3, like a handful of people at that time. And then, your audience knows Julie, that has exploded since then. And it's just continued to grow. It's been what I reference as a very collaborative culture. Especially for freelancing, it's picked up heavily. There's not a lot of like a competitive nature, and I've just watched how that has snowballed really quickly over the years as it's built. So a lot of tech companies, motion design's picked up a lot, even for automotive and a lot of those places. But I don't know, it seems like it's been thriving and it hasn't really slowed down.
Yeah. What do you think, Kris? I mean, I know there's studios there, but then, like, for example, I met Dan last time I was there at this company called Vector Form, which was not really, it was kind of like a studio, but not really. It was like this interesting company, but it had a lot of video and 3D and motion design going on. What's your experience been there?
Same as yours, Joey. I met Dan at Vector Form. But no, I mean, I was born and raised in Michigan and came back and thought, among other things, what am I doing back here? Like Michigan it was on the upsurge, but I was like, oh, I'm coming back to where I came from. I felt like it was a downhill thing, but it was literally the motion design community. We call ourselves MoGraph Mondays. Meet once a month, and Dan and I met there. And I was amazed at the amount of introverts that were brainiacs that were all together. We're hanging out. I kept telling my wife month after month, like, these are my people. I got to keep going. Of course, I have a family, and late nights was kind of hard, but whatever. But I would say it's like the foundation for what has helped me thrive into my career, I think, moving into motion design full time. And, there's so many things. Dan and I guess Dan started an offshoot of the Detroit branch of Motion Design Meetup, and I joined that, and that's how we kicked it off. It's kind of the foundation, I think. And most of the things I think about, and I tell people all the time, is all around like community and not doing things alone, whether it's watching YouTube or having a friend or it being in a forum. And the motion design community in Detroit is like, what has caused like kind of that foundation, I think.
That's awesome. So Dan, what are some of the differences that you notice being in LA, and where it's obviously a much bigger industry there? There's way more artists versus a place like Detroit.
Biggest difference, I couldn't get work out there, ironically enough. So being young and trying to break into the industry was tough because there was so much competition out there at the time. And that was about 2012. So again, I've been back in Michigan for a decade, but again, like I kind of got my start coming back with Vector Form and learned a ton. And as that community has grown, it's honestly been a lot better to get work back here and to try to grow as a career, just because there's just so much competition out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So like I said, we met at Vector Form, and I was only there for a day. We were shooting some video. There's a video that's like older on our YouTube channel. Everyone can go look at it if they want. But what struck me, because we had just come, I think, from Gunner, who's now been acquired by Duolingo, and they're much more of a traditional studio, and they have After Effects artists and cell animation. They also do 3D. But at Vector Form, the stuff that you were showing me was like Unity, and I think you may have even had someone working in Lightwave or something like that, but it was way more 3D focused. You were doing stuff for VR, and I think that's a little bit more widespread now, but back then it felt super cutting edge, and you were showing me stuff that I didn't even really know was possible. And it just seems like you're kind of one of these guys that seems to have been early on some of that stuff. So I'm curious, like, why you think that is. I mean, is that just kind of how you're built, or was it just by virtue of being there? How have you been so early on all this stuff, including Unreal, which we're going to get into?
Yeah, I mean, I would say some of that was a bit of dumb luck. So I kind of mentioned my career started when I came back to Michigan. And at vector form, if we're doing shout outs, John Einsland gets a big one, who was the Lightwave user at the time. I was very fortunate to work with a great crew of people there. Another one I'll name drop is Clemens Conrad, who taught me a lot about the business side of things and kind of directing, but working with John, who just has a massive brain for this sort of stuff. It was just, I don't know, it was like pre-Rive, before, UI and UX were starting to really kind of get their hands on motion design. There was still this weird crossover between enterprise and the game development, as like headsets and stuff were starting to hit the market. And then motion was, kind of the heart and soul of all of that. So even at that point, like we would do video and animation as one arm of the business for marketing, and the other arm was more of this interactive stuff. So yeah, to answer your question, I was early into it. My chops of doing 3D and just kind of tinkering with, the Radiant game engine before that, trying to just get into Activision when I was out in LA. So I had some people mentoring me how to do game stuff. I really didn't know squat when I came back, but when I asked them later, why did you hire me? They said they saw potential. So I had the opportunity to just learn a lot in that community and grow. And then since then, when I started to see how a lot of these jobs in the business was growing, for interactive and real time and all that stuff, it kind of opened my eyes to, like, as technology grows, these worlds are going to continue to merge, and this is a good path to get out ahead of. And then eventually, that led to Unreal for other reasons.
That's awesome. And Kris, I know you've got a Cinema 4D background. You're an awesome 3D artist. So, how are you kind of looking at all this new real-time stuff? Like, how deep have you gone into it at this point?
Oh boy, that's a emotional journey.
You can cry if you need. It's okay.
It's also, I mean, it's highs and lows for sure. And prior to like 3D and motion graphics stuff, thanks for the compliment, is like video production for me. So I kind of come from that space where like writing, doing pre-production, scouting locations, having a camera. I mean, mostly loving like being a cinematographer and loving cameras and lenses and lighting and all that stuff. So interesting. I really dove into specifically 3D with like Octane and Redshift because of the pseudo live viewport, right? Where you can kind of see how things are happening as they kind of come, up from noise or whatnot. But then building environments and things in Unreal was very, I think, exciting and drawing in, not necessarily natural. Well, I guess that concept of it is natural, but things about motion graphics were definitely more technical. And then times, I would say maybe 100 once you jump into Unreal with things, getting very technical and having things work correct, I guess. But like anything, I keep telling myself anything really good isn't going to be easy. And that's been time and time again, I think, proven. So I don't know if that kind of answered, right? I kind of swimmed around
in like a roundabout way. I think we got there, and I want to get into like the sort of the technical challenges of learning Unreal. But Dan, I wanted to ask you because a lot of people like on this podcast and just sort of the industry at large, it seems like everyone's sort of talking about Unreal now. Like everyone has some vague awareness that there's something going on there, and I should probably learn it. And I think if you haven't used it, really the thing about it is that it's really fast. It can like render stuff in real time. If you're doing final renders, it's not exactly real time, but it's very, very fast. So that's good. But why do you think that this is happening? Like, why does it feel like it's kind of a big deal now and it's starting to kind of penetrate deeper into the industry?
I'll try to not make this too long of a winded answer, but it's kind of to me like when the GTX cards came out and then Octane was an option. So now it's like you could do amazing rendering within Cinema 4D without having to use a farm or wait days. Like it became more accessible to a smaller team. Unreal is similar in that regards. It's very different. And I won't get into right now a lot of the differences there, but they come out with new ways of utilizing like NVIDIA's technology. So it's like they're crunching millions or billions of polygons with nanite. So like you can instantly make a forest. They have Lumen, which is their, GI solution. It has a lot of drawbacks. There are a lot of issues, but if you can figure out how to navigate those and how to work, like when I'm doing Redshift comparisons for render times, it legitimately was 100 times faster for the small test that I was doing. Just wow. Like, I'm not kidding. And then that also said like, hey, we want like a forest and we want all these trees to animate up. And it's like a 15 or we just did a project. There was like a 70-second shot on 4K cameras that we had to render, and had to do it several times. Using Unreal makes this accessible to a small team like us, because they knew, the agency we worked with, when they started this project, they would have lost all their money and then some paying a render farm to do this. And then the real-time preview is kind of the other part on top of that. So the second reason of why I think some of this becomes so important is, like, on this project, we're inviting and asking the creative directors, like, hey, look over our shoulders. Let's do a working session. I know, you're trying to respect our space. And he was so giddy. He's like, oh, I get to look over your shoulder and point. But I'm like, this saves us time, and we can just move these mountains around in real time and you can see it. And the same thing kind of went for the studio owner. Like, we're on a call, 10 people on this, Zoom call. And he's like, can you move that mountain over? And I just click it and move it over in 2 seconds. And he's elbowing the creative director, big smile on his face. And he's like, this would have taken 2 days for me to see this kind of change. So when you scale that up across the project, when we're doing 9 cameras and, I don't know, thousands and thousands of frames daily, we could just rip through these things. And the quality it's very good if you know how to do it. It's not going to match Redshift, and there's a lot of caveats, so you kind of have to know where the holes are so you can help direct and work around that. But there's definitely a lot of payoff for the speed in those 2 areas.
Yeah, so you just brought up something I hadn't thought about before. It's really interesting. So, like, when I was early in my career, and even when I was running a studio in Boston, I was working with ad agencies mostly, and they love working sessions. They love to come in and sit on the couch and order a Starbucks and then watch the Pixel Monkey move the pixels around. But as a 3D artist, that's extraordinarily difficult and almost never happens, right? Because of the just the time it takes, right? And I mean, I haven't used Unreal, and it's been a while since I've been a working motion designer, right? But when I was working in Cinema 4D, you weren't looking at anything even approximating a final render. It was like the wireframes, and maybe there was some shading on there. So I'm curious if you think that Unreal's ability to sort of open that up, now you can actually do client working sessions. Is that something that other artists and smaller studios should be thinking about?
I think so. The collaboration on at least the project we just did, and if I name drop, the guy's name is Elliot, who's the creative director we worked with. It reduced a lot of wasted time. It cut back on a lot of errors. And it's funny because he would send me like images off Tumblr of 5 directors, pointing at the screen of the poor person sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
But it's like, to this point, we could keep sending you renders. You could send us, feedback, or to some point, we'll just invite you in, like, just tell us what you want. Let's work through it. We'll tell you what doesn't work. But we were able to cover so much more ground at such a smaller scale. And I'm firmly of the mindset that, like, this game design and motion design, like in broadcast, these worlds are merging together as the technology gets better and better. And some of these working sessions, like, I don't know, it's better to have new ways of collaborating, or I don't know, go back to the old ways of just being more efficient, more cost effective, and everybody wins.
Well, I know we'll get to it later too, but Joey, the live working sessions is a major stage in virtual production, at least in our experience, like with directors and DPs, and we're screen sharing, and they're who knows where. And we're like, they're giving us minute details, like boom the camera down. Oh, back up. What lens are we on? Oh, can you push in a little bit? Let's move this light. And they need to see it, like not like come up from the noise, like live interactive. So I not only with motion graphics work, but also like with virtual production, our experience is those live working sessions and the virtual scouting, they call it, in those like setups in the scene and with the camera information. We can get more into that later, but
I want to throw one little nerd tidbit on there that I have found very helpful, and that's kind of convinced me. But like having this viewport in real time, like I like to animate lights and materials and do a lot of this stuff that it was just really hard to preview when I was working in Cinema 4D, even just simple stuff. And now it's like, spin it around, keep changing keyframes, swap out different iterations really quickly, and then hammer out some versions of it. Like there's a lot of payoffs to it. So
scaling UVs so quick with material instance. Yep, that's how big I want it.
Yeah, I remember trying to do something with like a gobo in Cinema 4D years ago. I'm sure it's better now, especially with like GPU renderers. But even just having a sense of what the hell it's going to look like and how fast the gobo should be animated and stuff like that, you'd have to just like wait 10, 15 minutes to get some super low res preview, and then change one thing and then wait another 10, 15 minutes. So I totally see the I totally see the promise of Unreal. Now, when clients come to you, and I just had a conversation about this with Joel Pilger, who's a consultant for studios, and this has been kind of a theme, I think, over the last couple of years, when there was like some really hard times in 2023 for everybody. Last year was better, but still not great, and hopefully this year is awesome. But clients are not really doing the thing where they say, I need a motion designer. I need an Unreal artist, right? What they're saying something else, and then you're like, oh, I can do that. I'm going to use this tool to do it. So what are your clients actually coming to you for? Are they saying, oh, you two, I know that you use Unreal and that's what I need? Or are they saying something completely different and you just know they don't care that I'm using Unreal? They just know I can do it.
Chris, I want to hear what you think, but I'd say it's a mixed bag. I feel like half of it is we just want it to be done. And for us, Unreal means speed if we know we can do it the way we want. And if not, we use other options like Redshift. But there are some projects where they're coming to us saying, like, we know this needs to be done in Unreal because we know it can't be done outside of that. Virtual production is almost all requesting Unreal because they know you've got to pipe the stuff through that to work with the stage. But yeah, Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as a small studio and also kind of a startup, it's a little bit of a balance. Like we're niching, but we're also doing the wide spectrum of stuff too. So some projects, like, we're picking, is this an Unreal project or a C4D project? Other projects is a little combination of both. Dare we say even some 3D in After Effects even sometimes.
Oh, God forbid.
But then to Dan's point, some of these projects, they're very specific. And that's, I think, the goal we have for our company is really utilizing that niche. Cause like, I don't think we would have gotten called by a number of these places to do just motion graphics work. Cause they know 100 places, whatever, but they got a referral or we made a connection on a forum or something. And we're an Unreal shop that are motion designers. I don't think there's too many of those yet. So we're finding our niche in that front. But in general too, I was going to say, thinking back to my like cinematography roots, I've always thought about Unreal or Redshift or whatever, to Dan's point earlier, kind of like you pick cameras. Granted, I came from a small like studio, or even kind of a homemade thing. So we just kind of use the camera we had, but you pick a camera and you pick the lens that's going to get the job done with the least resistance, the most efficiency, and whatever, depending on like high speed or low light sensitivity or lens choice, depth of field, or how much it's going to compress the background. Those choices, I've often thought about Unreal or cinema in that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dan, let's talk about, you kind of alluded to it a little bit. Unreal works very differently than, C4D Blender, right? And so maybe we can talk about, like, what are some of the biggest learning curves you have to get over? Assume someone is comfortable in Cinema 4D. Maybe they've used Redshift. So the principles of 3D, they understand. But now they're like, oh, I want to use this new thing that's really, really fast. What are the things that they're going to bump into that are challenging?
So I would say, like, the medium lift, like lighting is slightly different, but it won't take too long. Materials are fairly different and you have to think differently about how it's done. So those are kind of like, they're not too bad. There's two more things that I would say. The second biggest hurdle is just thinking of like how you build things. So in cinema, you just kind of compose everything in the scene. It's all living in a file. All the tools are right there. With Unreal, it definitely helps to have a more modular approach. And then we've been talking with a handful of people. Aaron and Winbush have been super helpful in this regards to just kind of going back and forth. But you have to build in pieces. It's like Lego bricks. Like, you import chunks of a project and then assemble in Unreal. And I think once you can wrap your head around a pipeline that works, it's very nice when you get it. So you can update one piece and it'll update globally throughout the project. But it is an adjustment. And then on top of that, the worst thing that I say, which is ironic, is animation. Cars, it does great. Characters, it does great. Like, it's been making games for so long, but all this motion design stuff is fairly new. And like you want to take a cube and stretch it and do a bunch of flowy stuff. Like, it's a fair amount of gymnastics. And that's where we started doing just YouTube tutorials, because like, this should be easier if you don't want to do characters and whatnot. And it's getting better. But I think that's been the biggest learning curve, especially for motion designers, is like, everyone will just say, like, you can just make it animate in Cinema. So how do you get into Unreal and just make it work? And the Cineware plugin is one of those things. I tried it again today for camera tracking, and it promises a lot of things. just like Unreal has. I love the tool, but it promises grandiose, huge things, and it can only, it just doesn't always live up to the hype.
Yeah, what are some like specific examples of those tools that, you want a cube to follow a spline and kind of squash and stretch as it moves? All right, like what kind of things are missing in Unreal currently that would make that stuff easier?
Yeah, so I'm thinking if you had a bunch of sweeps, whatever, you have like a sphere that sweeps along a spline. You think it takes a few seconds to do in Cinema 4D, and then to bring that into Unreal, your options are usually bake it as an alembic. You can try to rebuild it in Unreal, which is usually not terribly pleasant. Or you can try to get creative with like morph targets or like skeletal rigging for FBX files, and it sucks. So you kind of have to know how to build small things, or like if you build an alembic, like you make this great morphing thing, like you may have to do it in 4 to 5 pieces, depending on what it is. And then on top of that, it's like, oh, if you want it to be out of glass, then you probably just don't want to use Unreal.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Kris, I mean, are you at the point now where you're comfortable in Unreal? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the things that frustrate you, that in Cinema 4D, you take this shape, you drop it in a cloner, you put this vector on it, there it is, it's cool, right? And I know some of that now exists in Unreal with the motion design tools, but then there's probably a lot of simple things that you miss.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, this is a subject that I wake up every day and think I'm gonna do hard things today, and it's gonna be rewarding, and we're gonna But I mean, we're currently on a project, and we're kind of being transparent with the creative directors and studio owners about like what's capable in Unreal and what's not, and into everything. I would say like based on our knowledge, because Unreal is a massive tool, and there's probably easy ways to do some of the things we're talking about. But we do what we know, and I mean, we know Cinema 4D. We know there's a pipeline to get it in, but there's also limitations to the things we are learning about in Unreal, like the motion design tools and those other things. So their response to us was like, oh man, good job. Like, thanks for doing this. Working with a platform that you're constantly fighting, it seems like. We're like, well, that's kind of the nature of anything. You're kind of trying to figure out what this thing is good at, what it's not, saving regularly and whatnot. I was thinking about it today, and like, I'm approaching Unreal as a motion designer coming from Cinema 4D, and the slow beautifulness of Redshift. And there's optimizations that go into, a Redshift render, or getting your viewport to, show quicker. So you can work more interactively, or speedily. But, and that's like built into Unreal. And I'm constantly trying to see, oh yeah, this glass isn't refracting, or there's no shadows being cast here, or this thing's glistening. Why is this thing flickering? Oh, the normals are reversed. You can see right through this thing. All these little things that I guess are just built into 3D that I think I took for granted, at how easy like Cinema 4D is, intuitive for designers. I think dumb designers like me, I should say that. I shouldn't say that, but there's like, it's just really easy, very intuitive, I should say. But there's a lot of little things to figure out, and there's a back and forth. And there's ways, to your point, Dan, I think of like building connections between Cinema and Unreal, or Blender and Unreal, or whatever 3D tool you're using, and you can go back to that tool and update it. And it's not just using Datasmith or whatnot. You can update an Alembic file or an FBX file, go back to Cinema, update it, and then re-import it and then it updates. And so there's streamlined workflows, I think.
Got it. Well, I know that Epic's been putting pretty significant resources into the motion design tool set in Unreal. And, from my perspective, and I've talked to Andy Blondin, who's like the product manager in charge of that, a little bit about this. And, my take is that where Unreal really could do some damage is if it can sort of rebuild the tool sets that you have in things like VizRT and Chiron. Because, by the nature, first of all, those tools are very expensive. And, if you're Fox Sports and you're buying, a bunch of those, I mean, it's probably millions of dollars. And so that seems like a real business opportunity for Unreal. But you guys are kind of using it for different stuff. I don't know if you also build these sort of real-time toolkits like that. But what are the types of projects that Unreal is currently really, really good for?
Yeah, I would say, at least for me, I started using it as like an offline render just because that was the easiest path to entry, and had a goal of like, hey, could this replace Redshift? Not entirely, but yeah, like I think Kris touched base on it. We've been finding a bit of a niche of, I don't know, speed and power. I would say, like, we can do these. We just did, again, I'm going to reference this project again, but one of the projections we did, it was like a cube. So there was 4 walls at 4K. We had, I think, 2 versions of that. And then we had another location, because this was like distributed globally, was an 11K screen. That had some challenges too. But again, this was like a 7-minute video, and we had probably, I don't know, 75% of that ground to cover. So we could do a lot quickly. And one of these shots explicitly it was a combination of some procedural tools, some landscape stuff, and then the motion design tools to, like, hey, camera's moving through. We need all these like trees and forests to just grow up around you. And then we need to iterate on this, like, close to daily. So with that, it's like, yeah, we can output significantly more. We definitely sacrifice some flexibility, and then kind of like thinking a little bit in that game design realm too, like kind of changes the way you think about some of this stuff. But those types of projects, I would say, are one thing that we have been getting more of. We did another one not that long before that was projection mapping, again, like a bunch of massive walls on a space. And that was all motion design tools, but it's like, we can only do so much in After Effects, and they need 3D renders. So bigger resolutions, faster render times, and then again, the virtual production is just at its nature more of a hybrid, where you're running in real time, but you are kind of doing video planning. And that one to me is a bit more like an interactive project, where you're going back and forth with just different stuff.
Yeah. So you've both mentioned a couple of times that, like, so you got the speed in Unreal, but, and you're kind of comparing it to Redshift, right? So in terms of the quality you're able to get, what are some of the differences there?
So the biggest thing I would say is, at least when we look at stuff, like, as long as it looks good, the render is good. So for these last few projects we've done, especially this one, like, they've been more than happy with the quality of it. I would say, like, the lighting looks probably a bit stylized, but like, it all looks really good compared to Redshift. There are certain things where they like, oh, we want this wall to like come in out of glass and particles to go through it. And then it's just like, yeah, you got a couple strikes right there, because glass isn't there yet. I'm still hedging my bets that their real-time path tracer is not too far away, which I think is going to be another huge upgrade, because then transparency is one thing Unreal just fights with. Kris has been fighting with this too, but like transparent text, even on an image with like, a tree behind it, and there's just the alphas conflict and it causes artifacts, like just dumb stuff like that. And then refraction and caustics, like, oh, just forget it. If that's what you want, this probably isn't the route to go, but it's getting there. And I don't think it's too far away. So a lot of these hurdles with learning the hard stuff of like, how do you animate, is, at least in our minds, prepping us for when that drops.
Mm-hmm. I've never been more excited about some of these version updates. When Unreal releases a new version, we haven't been dabbling in 5.5 on client work too much yet, but the things like the virtual production stage or something has a limit to 5.3 or 5.4 or whatnot. But mega lights, a big one, like the amount of lights you can have in a scene, is another major, like, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that Unreal is still getting there. I think as we're comparing it literally, side by side to Redshift. Yeah, specifically glass. Dan, we also talked about like little things like fading something up from zero opacity. Like, there's different ways to do that in Unreal, but they all look kind of crunchy compared to like just a simple opacity fade. But yeah, so there's a number of little things that you just kind of gauge it on if this is the right tool for the job, I think, or the hurdles around it. So.
Got it. All right, well, let's dive into one of your projects. And, this came out a little while ago, but it's called Travelers. And I thought it was so cool when I saw it. I also love how, Dan, you're like the male model and it, like, trying to look all chiseled as you walk through the scene. And for everyone listening or watching this, we'll link to it in the show notes. But it's basically a spec piece, right, if I understand correctly, that you guys did to show off how you can use virtual production. And I'd love to first just start, like, what was the story behind this? Because I can't imagine the amount of work this took, and someone had to pay for the studio time and stuff. So kind of, tell me the story behind Travelers.
So Kris, I'm going to tee you up on this because I want you to run with it, but I'm just going to set it straight. I was not intended to be in this thing. We had our actor back out, and I begrudgingly chose to do it. So I'm just throwing that out, Kris.
Nice.
Yeah. That isn't a tee up.
That was more of a humble brag, but
yeah.
Covering my bases.
yeah.
For the record on that, our director, who's a friend of mine, everyone's a volunteer, and this will be the last thing we say about Dan being the male model, is the director was like, well, our volunteer actor, because everyone was volunteer, kind of wasn't able to do it. And so Dan, you look, you're a good looking guy. What do you think? So we were like weighing it out, because it was Dan and ours, like our companies kind of sponsored the whole thing. And we were like, well, that's a kind of a loss on the technical side of things, because you're going to be stuck, waiting on camera in front of the lights, and not be over at the brain bar, they call it. So anyway, yeah, Dan did a great job as an actor. But the story behind the whole thing was, I was working at the time at Rocket Mortgage, and our company was established, and Dan was encouraging me to kind of utilize it at work. And my boss, John Bug, fantastic guy, big part. I met him at the motion design community in Detroit as well. He was like, yeah, let's use Unreal somehow, virtual production. And so we started talking about it. And then his superior mentioned it a week later. And he's like, we're already looking into it. And so that turned into a Spec project. So there's actually a Spec project prior to our Spec project. There's a Spec project at Rocket Mortgage. And we did, I think, 5 scenes. And I kind of led that charge with Dan's help in the background. And we learned a lot. And it was actually at the end of the shoot, we had made some friends. And I was like, hey, guys, what do you guys think about doing something early next year? This was like October of 2022. I don't remember exactly. What do you think about doing some spec work next year for our portfolios? Because a lot of the stuff that they've been doing was behind NDAs and whatnot. And so we're like, yeah, great. The stage was like, sure, you guys can do it. We'll all share the work. And so I was like, well, there's a big cost savings right there. So I had a DP and a stage, and there was some gaffers and other people that were like, yeah, let's do it. So that kind of began early 2023, I think. Is that right, Dan? When we started just kind of collaborating, leading that, and we started gathering people who are interested. Because a lot of people had film production experience on set and in a studio, but not a lot of people had virtual production experience. And everyone was like, oh, I want to get in on that. And they were all great at their roles. The gaffers were fantastic. They just hadn't been on a virtual production stage or this or that. So in January, we started like weekly check-ins and moving the scenes forward. And we had a mural board that continually grew, and it just kind of became a mess. I could share it with you sometime. You can take a look at it. It was constantly just being organized. And on March, I don't remember when in March. It's been a few years, but we shot. We had a week on the stage, and everything was volunteer and donated. So I think it ended up being a number of $1,000. And a lot of people threw some money in and used their specialty. We divvied out scenes to build. That was more than you asked, but kind of a general overarching, I think. A lot of volunteers, a lot of excitement, a lot of hype. We wanted to do more to push it, and we have terabytes of BTS footage. We had photographers and video guys doing that as well, but we've been busy. We haven't been able to do anything with it. So.
Yeah, that's a tale as old as time. We also have terabytes of behind the scenes footage for school motion stuff too. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like, you got the opportunity at Rocket Mortgage to do a virtual production project. But maybe that was under NDA. You can't show it. And on the side, you're building Cart and Horse, which is your full-time gig now. Okay, cool. So you're doing a spec piece. Now, was the intention, like, did you sense this virtual production thing? This may actually become a much bigger deal. I mean, obviously, there's, movies and really well-known TV shows like The Mandalorian are using virtual production already. But at least in my mind, up until I saw your piece, to be honest, I thought, oh, well, this is kind of like the high-end Hollywood thing. It's not super accessible if you're like a small studio in Detroit that wants to offer this to your clients. Were you trying to sort of crack open that market, or was this just like, this seems cool, I want to try it?
Yeah, we're still kind of trying to crack open, because in a lot of ways it feels like we're the small nobodies in this world of multi-million-dollar budgets that will never, kind of be able to compete. But I think that was a little bit of, there was a little twinkle in the air of like, oh, there's potential here, because this actually isn't that expensive. I mean, it's still, it's going to be a 6-figure budget minimum, I think, to be effective for projects. But but there's still work there for people. It's within reach. And so it's been slow going in Michigan, I think, for us to kind of grow this market. We've pushed around. We've lost a few jobs because we got underbid or this or that and different things. But we've been doing work out of the state and here and there. And I think that's still going to be the dynamic. There's always going to, like anything, there's going to be the big players, and then there's going to be the middle ground, maybe small time folks. And so that I think was the goal. And I think, Michigan's still kind of catching its legs. There's been a potential for a stage to be built in Detroit for a year and a half now, multiple players we've heard about and hearing about the talks from some people, and those have kind of pulled back because of the tough times and the election. And we're hoping those conversations start getting brought back up again.
Yeah. And adding to that, we've been trying to keep, Kris has done a better job of it than I have, but just kind of keeping an eye on the laws, because they're looking to bring like the film incentive back for Michigan. I think they're kind of copying after how Atlanta is doing it, from my understanding, but seeing that as an opportunity that we're looking to prep for a bit. Like, there could be an influx of work coming if we could get out ahead of it, assuming sometime early this year that goes through the legislature and gets passed. And when they had it before, I know they were doing a lot of like feature films filming here and all that stuff. So that's part of it too. It's like, if we can get a portfolio piece, we'll be pretty far ahead of the game as far as the state goes if everyone starts to ramp up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, so we'll talk more about the costs of this in a minute, but first I kind of want you both to just walk me through what is the process of doing this. Like, I've seen the behind the scenes stuff, and I get that there's a camera on set and the screen changes because it knows where the camera is. I get all that. But what is the prep like? How big of a shoot really is this? What are the limitations? Kind of talk me through, if I'm a car brand and I have this idea and you think maybe it's virtual production, what does the process look like to get this on screen?
Yeah, I would say in a nutshell, fix it in pre versus fix it in post is kind of like the mindset. And you move things like towards the front end of pre-production. And with that comes, caveats and like questions about, like we talked about earlier, like, is it a Cinema 4D job or an Unreal job? Is this an on-location job or is this a virtual production job? And I've heard of a number of places that do a mix of both. Some that obviously will do it all on location. Some that'll do all virtual. Our experiences have been all virtual. If I remember right, the pieces are all virtual, shot in a virtual stage. But sometimes they'll do exteriors of a car, driving, and then interiors and close-ups on a stage because they have more control versus driving in a.
As far as planning goes, could you speak to? I'd say as a reference project, the lottery job we did. Could you speak to how we walked through that process from all the pre-production planning, like shot setup, even like paper drawings with the directors leading all the way to delivering to the stage?
Yeah, I mean, so the fix and pre kind of concept in that, like, there's the VAD, the virtual art department, kind of is a kind of a new phrase, I think, for the team that's kind of building it ahead of time. And so there's a lot of collaborative back and forth, very much like a motion design project, and we're finding assets. Well, we're talking about the script. We're getting mood boards. We're getting like AI generated, kind of frames. Like, this is the neighborhood shot kind of angle and the vibes that we want. And so we try to rebuild those. We find assets that look like that, whether it's like homes that look like this, or these types of trees, or this time of year or whatnot. And then kind of confirm those assets. We work with the directors and DP on that process. And then start blocking in a scene. Just kind of basics, whether it's, we've found using like squares and, just kind of small, natural objects has been just as fast as dropping in the actual assets sometimes. Like, just let's drop in some Megascans trees or whatever, like a house. Granted, some of those don't have materials or whatnot, but then you can start putting a camera in there and start blocking in shots. And so really it starts with that. Like, now you have a foundation for your scene. It starts like most things. You start big, make sure it's blocked in. Okay. And then you go back and start adding detail, because once you start doing that, then it gets like costly to make changes. And then, the live working sessions where we're constantly checking in and tweaking lighting. Is that kind of general, Dan? I think that's the general gist of it.
Yeah, I mean, if I went like process like start to finish, we used Miro a lot to just span this whole thing out. So we'd get our AV script in the beginning. We've got our shots. We would divide up scenes between however many artists there are. And then, at least for like the lottery job, we spent a lot of time with the directors and the DP screen sharing in Unreal. Like, all right, we're going to do camera scouting. Like, put the dummy in here, get your basic composition set. Now we're going to start practicing camera moves. Or if they knew the exact camera moves, we would set those up and at least get it close enough. It didn't need to be as rigid as VFX to like track stuff. But to Chris's point, like fix it pre, instead of everyone looking at a screen after the green screen's been keyed out and the compositor's working with it, you're setting up the scene, like move the house here, move this tree, let's move the lighting around. Okay, let's just keep watching the shot over and over to see how it changes, like change the lens length and all that. So that way, when the time you deliver and get to the stage, most of the prep work is done. And on that project, I think they shot 6 locations in one day. That was the big thing that they had done. And then they were also doing color grading and editing live on set. So they were making this whole commercial, like 90% of it in one day at the studio shooting.
The one thing you started talking about with the stage, then at some point you start to do the handshake with the stage for optimization. You send your scene file over and they bring it up and get it on all of their computer nodes and get it on the wall and see the frame rate and how it's running, because it's a lot different than your individual computer. And then there's some optimizations that go back and forth. But then there's usually some, like, I don't know, it depends on but pre-optimization or optimization days before talent shows up and the whole crew and whatnot. And what we've noticed during those times, when like some key players like the DP and whatnot show up, like there's just a general sense of like preparedness that they feel. Like there's no questioning. Like, we've scouted these scenes. We've been here. We know where to go. Let's bring it up. Let's bring it up. We feel like we're 90% there. Okay, let's do the extra 10% of tweaking. Now that I have my stand-in talent for Dan till Dan arrives as the main actor. But for our spec piece, sorry, that was my joke. I didn't connect all the dots. But like someone else would stand in and get the real soft boxes up, and then you start doing the kind of the merge, where what the camera is actually seeing and then the wall behind, and tweaking things so it looks really, really nice and it blends well. And that's like the last 10% versus scurrying around. How are we going to set this up? We've done so much scouting we can do ahead of time, but we've done all the virtual scouting. Everyone feels very prepared. Granted, there's new variables now. So like the stage wall goes down, or Unreal's glitching out, and people are like, I don't know, we haven't seen this before. There's always 10 of those. It seems like we haven't seen this before. But no, every production we've been on, usually we're ahead of schedule. That's pretty rare. And people are pretty calm, and we're filming the desert or the Arctic in a AC controlled building with Crafty right there. And, it's very nice, easy going, production. So,
yeah. That's beautiful. Okay, thank you for walking me through that. So it sounds like the initial part is really almost like a traditional previs kind of process that you would do for a feature film or something like that. And then, so I'm trying to kind of understand, like, what's the value prop of virtual production, right? So you've already mentioned that, I think you kind of hinted that it's less expensive than a real shoot, especially if you're going to do 6 locations. Like, if you can do that in one day on a virtual production, it's way cheaper. I think a lot of people listening to this probably have spent most of their career in post-production and may not actually really realize how big of a difference the budgets are between, hey, I need you, motion designer, to make a 1-minute explainer video versus I need a 1-day shoot at a studio. And that can cost 10 times more. It's not intuitive. So what are the budgets for these things typically? I mean, I remember doing studio shoots where the rule of thumb was it's like $100,000 a day to rent a studio and have, the crew and the actors and all that kind of stuff, which blew my mind. Is it similar for virtual production? So you're maybe not saving money, but you're saving time, or how does that work?
Well, I've seen a variety of stage costs. The one we worked on, Golden Hour in Grand Rapids, is significantly cheaper. I think just they have awareness of the market here, and compared to like 10 potentially times more, like numbers you're talking about, for like a day rental. I think time is money, and time is the biggest savings, I think, what I've seen. But then again, it's a given, like it's a variable. So like one shoot, we were as a big techno crane, and the camera was pushing in. How many was that for Michigan Lottery? It was 5 locations. Oh, that was the one, 6. Yeah, I can't remember. But just to move that thing and the crew, like, I don't know, you get one, probably maybe two locations in a day if you're lucky. So then, yeah, multiply everybody that's needed times that for a day rate, then things get real expensive real fast.
Yeah.
I think that one we kind of caught wind. That was like 300K or something ish. Is that right, Dan? Which that seems to
Don't
be
remember.
lower minimal.
I think they're decent. As far as like the value proposition goes, I know one of the biggest things producers and directors seem to be interested in is level of control. So obviously with motion design, like you're not bound to physics, you can make whatever you want. Like that's one avenue. But like if a cloud comes by and you have a massive crew sitting there waiting for the clouds to come by, like that's time that's being turned into money, which for us, like we just move the clouds or we control the clouds. Or worst case scenario, you set up a whole shoot outside somewhere and you get rained out, and that's just like it's done, even if you pay for talent. For the spot we did with the 6 locations, I mean, it was the middle of winter, so it looks like death outside in Michigan, and it's cold. But we can do, Detroit waterline in the summer. We can do a nice picnic. Like we have full control over the seasons, the weather, and all that stuff.
Yeah. And so what are some of the limitations of virtual production? So obviously you've got a screen that has a finite height, right? So, are there certain angles that don't work as well? Like, can you get super wide? Can you do a really low angle shot? Or are you going to see the top of the screen? Like, how do you kind of navigate? I mean, I guess even in pre-production, knowing where the camera and the talent can even be so that the screen covers it in the end.
So yeah, we found ourselves constantly fighting to get wider shots because there's just a lot of close-ups and mediums, and you'd see off the stage the LED wall or see the floor off to the right or something. And so that's where practical art department, real props come in and blending, that sort of a thing. And there's plenty of like post effects that can be done. I know, like even we think about Mandalorian, I've heard from people who know that there's plenty of VFX done to that in post because it wasn't all on the wall or in the space. So and then there's XR, where if you pan off the wall, it just kind of Unreal kind of blends the two. But then there's issues with that as well, new variables. So that is all confirmed in virtual scouting, like you were saying. But then that's where there's a collaboration between art department that we realized as well. So who builds it first? I guess we were always like, well, what can you find in the area? So, we can find this car for whatever. This is the car we have. So we would mock it up, or we're going to build a fake mountain thing or something. What are they, I don't know. It was always a balance between what you can find in the area that art department could build to build what we built in Unreal, or do we build something they find in Unreal? But yeah, there's a balance back and forth between how to kind of blend the seams, the ceiling, the sides, and really the floor. Where the floor meets the wall was always a thing to blend, whether you're hiding a bush there or you're planting a curb around the edge. The opening shot of our spec piece, Travelers, with that car scene, we built a curb that just kind of goes around the edge of the wall perfectly, because we have the LED wall as a mesh object inside of our scene, and we just built a curb right there. So right at the edge of where the cement floor and the stage, the physical space meets the LED wall, there's a virtual curb. So it like kind of leans into those natural seams. So those are definitely considerations.
Yeah, a couple things to piggyback on that. Shout out to Jeff George. We had a great DP that we worked with. So someone who knows how to work with the lighting. So we have obviously the big wall that wraps around behind. And then they had a wall on wheels with a sensor so they could position to get reflections and do additional lighting. But things like moire, like you can't focus on the screen or you'll see the pixels. Working with someone like him, like he knew how to shoot, how to navigate the space and calculate lighting and really make it look good on the monitors. He was fantastic. From a technical standpoint, the biggest thing we run into hurdle-wise is frame rates. So the wall in Grand Rapids was running off of like 3 separate chunks. So you had, I think, 2 or 3 computers running these 3 panels on there. And we would find, like, we would play a video file for like an arcade screen. And if it crossed over that seam, sometimes there would be tearing, or like, obviously the animation didn't line up correctly. So we had to plan around that. Or other stages where it's like, if it's just one screen and one machine powering it, you're trying to treat this like a game. Like there's a lot more pixels, there's a lot more stuff happening. And when you've got to hit, I don't know, something like 90 frames per second or whatever, like 24 at the bare minimum, you can't have that lagging, because if the performance isn't there, you're just done for.
Yeah. Dan, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm just curious. So like, there was a company in St. Petersburg, Florida that I used to be in contact with, and they would do projection mapping. That was kind of their thing. And so they taught me a little bit about how that works at scale, where you have these video servers that can drive, 8 or 12 projectors, but it keeps them all in sync. And it's almost the way, if you have a multi-camera shoot, you need some source of like time code. So they're all synced and shooting at exactly the same time. Because if this camera's shooting its frame a split second before this one, then they're kind of out of sync. And then it sounds like that's what you're saying. If there's 3 projectors and one of them is like a hair behind in terms of when it's projecting the frames, you're going to see that on a camera. So, but I know that problem has been solved somewhat for projection. So is this just because it's cutting edge and this stuff hasn't quite gotten figured out? Like, what's the hardware limitations that cause these issues right now?
So hopefully I'm going to give this my good old college try.
Yeah, go for it.
We're speaking out of our lane a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of smarter people than us that we rely on heavily. But with that, like projection mapping, my understanding is it's playing, video files. So it'll queue all of these up and it will play those in sync. It's similar, but slightly different in the fact that like you have one camera that's rendering live whatever it sees. So you're taking that single feed and then, you're doing the camera tracking data and all the movement and stuff like that. But then, you have 3 different computers controlling a chunk of the screen and figuring out like, one, how do you make this fast enough? But then how do you sync all these up? That's like way beyond me. We heavily lean on the stage people to bail us out there because, I don't know.
We had been doing things on, the technology and all the pieces talking together. I remember that was a conversation point all the time, and how all this stuff's being developed. And this was a year ago for that project. But I assume it's still the same way. But all these, like some of these are in beta. I know the DP, Jeff George, was talking to, I think it was a lens company that was building a plugin in Unreal to kind of work with the color grading and all that stuff in real time. And so the stuff built into Unreal at the time was not necessarily favorable, I guess. And that plugin was working on one day, and then the next day we were filming and it wasn't. And he was on the phone with them in Germany, and then things you're talking about like the technology of the LED walls and the technology of the multi nodes, the computers running Unreal, and then the all of these things like talking together is another interesting battle of kind of fighting DIY, not really DIY, whatever. These are professionals, but they were all kind of stitching it together.
Yeah. They're on the bleeding edge, and I guess I like that you're signing up for that if you're doing this kind of stuff. That's awesome. Well, okay. So hopefully everyone listening has like a much better idea. I certainly do, of like what it takes to do virtual production, and some of the limitations and the advantages. And to me, like my takeaway is that the advantage, it's kind of twofold. One is you can be on set and move that mountain instantly and change your shot without having to literally rotate the entire camera lighting setup. You can just rotate the world, which is kind of nice. But the promise of being able to shoot on 6 completely different locations in one day because you're just loading a new scene is kind of insane. And if you understand the limitations, this seems like this is like a perfect combination of what motion designers are good at, and then what production companies are probably feeling similar pressure to us right now. How do we get more for less? And this is kind of an interesting way to do that. So the piece is beautiful. Like the Traveler's piece, everyone should go watch it. It's really, really cool. I love the final shot where you kind of reveal the screen at the end as the camera pulls back. Really clever. So what has that piece done for you guys? I mean, it sounds like you've been doing this virtual production, but was that kind of a catalyst?
Yeah, for sure. It gave us like a talking piece for networking and reaching out to people, and something to talk about with, different studios in town, or obviously post online and people comment and make new things. But we definitely ran it around town in Michigan, and was meeting people, talking about potential, trying to share. I mean, the whole piece was really about, obviously for our marketing purposes and growing individually, but also learning in general, and sharing learnings. So whether it's us all doing the thing and learning together and helping each other, but also like we did make some website changes, and now we don't have it up, but we had like a whole write up, and that's yet to get back on there. And like we said earlier about all the BTS footage, and we did so many interviews. I think we interviewed 25 people or so while on production on set, and just talking about stuff. And now it's probably somewhat outdated, but like learnings and different how things went well and how this is better, and there's new struggles. So the whole goal was, I think, multifaceted, I think, and it definitely gained some traction, and we're still using it.
It definitely gave us a lot of, proof is in the pudding sort of deal, like some street cred, because I do feel like for us, as these projects with Unreal come up, there's a lot of like skepticism, or a lot that just hasn't been proven. So having like some good animated content to show like this is work that we stand behind and we're confident we can do. Virtual production was another one, because even clients came to the set and they're like, yeah, we expect this to look terrible. So they're sitting in the room, and then once they see it up on the monitor, I mean, the best compliment that we got was like, we couldn't tell where the wall started and the stage ended. So like it blended perfectly, and there was so much flexibility. So having that in our back pocket where it's like, yeah, I don't know, we've seen a lot of crap, we can at least pull that up and say like, this is our work. Yeah, we can stand behind it.
Yeah. I was going to say one other thing. The reason why it's so good, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is because of all the professionals that were on this. And that was a huge boost for our like confidence. And you just like, you start something and then you get all these people that are like, yeah, I'm going to help with that. Like, wow, okay. And they're like, yeah, I stand behind your work, and like, we're great friends and blah, blah. I know, and obviously they know they're going to benefit from it, but there's like some top-notch players in the area that came to the table for this. And I mean, I'm not going to start to list them all, but that's why it looks so good. And that's a reminder to me that virtual production is a very niche. I mean, you find yourself very niche, like role. You can't do it all. Like Dan and I have realized, even in projects as we do them, like, sorry, that's like a technical director role, or that's like a stage, type of question, or that's probably a question for the DP or different things. Like we're finding like where our lane is, and then like kind of drawing lines. And I think that's, I don't know, that's good news for even the audience, thinking about like the audience, maybe mostly motion designers, because that's where we came from. And we're fitting right in well with that, knowing that there's other players in the pipeline that also kind of overlap, and there's collaboration and answering questions and problem solving and those sorts of things.
We know who we need to call to help make it look good. We can't do it all on our own.
Yeah, it reminds me so much of my career started at a production company, and I still feel like even now there's a little bit of a gap between production and post-production where motion design typically lives. But this really blurs the line. I mean, this is basically production, but like there's this extra layer on top. It's really interesting. I would love to come to one of these shoots and see what it actually looks like in real life, because the results are crazy. And I'm, I wouldn't be shocked if, a lot of production companies that want to get into this, but they don't have their own like staff of 3D artists and Unreal artists and all that kind of stuff, might subcontract this kind of stuff out to guys like you. I think that would be probably a really good thing for them to offer their clients. So let's talk a little bit about Cart and Horse. So we were talking right before we started recording, and I didn't realize that you guys had been building this while you both had full-time jobs, but now this is your full-time job. So how did that happen?
It's a gift.
Yeah. In hindsight, honestly, I'm sure. Yeah,
it was a gift. I mean, a severance is a gift. We both got severances. Yeah, we got we got laid off last year, and we had been building this prior. Kind of again mentioning how we met through the motion design community in Detroit, and hit it off. We don't live too far from each other. We were just like, let's start doing some projects together. We started a company back in 2021, and it's evolved into this. And then we started, we did the Spec piece, the Travelers piece, early last year, and just because it's like whatever. And like I don't necessarily believe. Well, I was gonna say things don't happen for a reason, or maybe they do, but you just utilize the things that do happen, and things were lining up, and so. We both got laid off quite closely around the same time, and this is kind of the full-time thing. So,
yeah, and I'd say even leading up to that, we talked about it. Like we've kind of seen a market for this type of work. We both agree. Like we both love this stuff, whether virtual production or 3D or the real time, like all of it. And then leading up to it over a few years, it's like, well, let's just prep and practice and prepare. And I know Kris had mentioned it earlier. I encouraged him, and I would do it for myself. Like I would do client work for General Motors. And it's like, and even some other projects where it's like, I'm going to teach myself to really get good at using Unreal. And I started using it as a design tool and using renders, and even on my day job. And I'm not proposing taking unnecessary risks, but there were some projects where it's like, you know what, screw it. I'm doing this in Unreal because I want to see how hard I can push myself. And it paid off because I was able to, I don't want to say outperform, but I was able to output a lot of different work that the client was not expecting, all while practicing and figuring out like these bumps in the road. And I know Kris was doing similar things at his job. So we kind of used our day job to really learn something that takes a long time to learn. So by the time, we both got let go and we're like, we're doing this. We were prepared enough.
Yeah. I just thought about Dan too, like along with that learnings, like one of our, I don't know, key values or something that I think we both share is like sharing learnings, which I know I've heard. And I think School of Motion has talked about a lot, even just like, it's a different world, where we just like hiding what we know to kind of protect versus like just sharing, and that's, I think, the beauty of YouTube and like the organized trainings that School of Motion has and whatnot, because people can pick up something and learn because people are sharing. And I know last year we spent a lot of our time really, and Dan really forced it almost on me. And there was a couple come to Jesus moments for our company where we're like, are you, whatever, we'll leave it there. Whereas like we were going through doing a lot of tutorials. So you can count up the number of tutorials on our YouTube channel and see who has the most, obviously Dan. But forcing ourselves to learn something and then document it and then share that with the world, not like, hey, look at what I know, but like, here's something that we found advantageous. I was thinking back on that, Dan, because like we've watched, Dan just shared the other day, a tutorial that he did. We've watched our own tutorials back again and again because it's like, oh yeah, how did we do that thing? Oh yeah, that's what it was. So I don't know why that's kind of the backbone of some of our company as well, I think too.
Yeah. I want to jump on something you said, Dan, about, taking risks, because what you guys are doing right now with this sort of cutting edge Unreal virtual production stuff, I guess you could look at it in one sense as a risk because it's not like a super established thing that everyone knows they can go get a job doing, right? It's still fairly niche and new, and not every client even knows that it's an option, right? But I don't know. My take is that like by the time everyone does realize how powerful it is and everybody wants to do it and it's no longer really a risk to do it, the ship has sailed to some extent, right? You guys are getting in very, very early on this. And it's risky, but I think, I don't know, it kind of feels right now like it's a good time to take risks, actually, for stuff like this. It's not risky to learn After Effects and learn how to be a video editor that uses After Effects. Everyone knows that that's a thing. It's a little riskier to position yourself as like a Rive specialist or an Unreal specialist. I don't think it will be that weird in like 5-10 years. So I think it's awesome. I think you guys are kind of modeling like what this kind of looks like. And sometimes getting laid off actually is the kick in the butt that you need to to really get down to it. Yeah. So what are the goals for Cart and Horse? What are you guys hoping to build with your studio?
I mean, we've talked for a long time, like a small studio. We definitely want to grow and have some people. One thing we learned a lot on, at least I did, on the Spec piece was that Travelers thing, virtual production thing, was I love just gathering some folks and having my best friends be people that I work with. And whether it's I'm learning from them or I'm helping them learn, so a small team of people that we really like kind of do stuff with and kind of have like a little culture for ourselves. Niching, I think, is something that we're really, with Unreal and interactive real time, and expanding on what we know with motion graphics. So we definitely, like you mentioned, see the world kind of moving into more of an interactive real time kind of thing, whether it's with a screen or a headset or something, whether it's concert or training, or we were chatting with some friends down the road the other day talking about maybe donor wall at hospitals being like a real-time interactive thing. Remember that? Yeah.
Lunar North.
And Lunar North. But like talking about how you can constantly make updated or this or that and building this thing for them. So definitely staying on the cutting edge of that. And I think just having fun doing it. I don't know. Like we got to get an office. sometime too, I guess. Like we both work out of our house, so that'll be a big milestone for our company too.
Well, we've been getting some business coaching lately, which has been really enjoyable.
Smart, very smart.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're asking a lot of these questions and forcing us to think about them. But some of the answers we've had that have come back of like, it's a lot more work. It's a lot of learning. I mean, Kris and I are both natural tinkerers, so wearing all these different hats. Joey's, I'm sure you can relate. It is rewarding and tiring, but it's kind of nice to get to be the creative directors and the people who do it and helping call the shots. So, not having the separation of all these great ideas that you may have and knowing like what you can do and how to execute on it and like great things you can deliver on all decided for you by somebody else. Like, I don't know, that's just been a nice perk as we're trying to grow and, inject ourselves as experts and figure out how to manage a business and grow it.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of the amazing upcoming guests we have on the School in Motion podcast or any of the other awesome content we have. Everything we talked about will be in the show notes, and I hope to see you next time.